Sometimes interviews just don't go the way that I planned. In this one, I speak with Art Lewis. I've appeared on his show more than 20 times. We usually talk about my book, not this time. And down the wormhole we went, I couldn't possibly give every last comment, so I added stuff here today. Good morning, Art. Just trying to stay out of trouble.
Yeah, I know. I don't know how you have enough time in your life to do what you do, but hey, I want to talk about a number of other things.
Sure.
Because not only does Jay deal in Medicare, as you know, but he is also a certified financial planner and has a whole bunch of other initials after his name. What do you see with the economy today and the future of inflation?
I clearly didn't expect this line of questioning, so it took me a few moments to gain my composure and try to figure out and organize my thoughts before answering. That said, if anything, I understated it here on my answer, and dramatically so. On the Facebook page, for example, on your Facebook page, on WSGW's, and I think that the concern here is not only the everyday shock that, a bunch of onions now cost $2, or $1.50 or something like that. But in addition to that is that, we've just become immune or basically addicted to low interest rates. And that permeates every financial decision, every price we pay, and whether or not we're fully prepared for notably higher borrowing rates and the effect that has on everyday consumers. I think that it's probably still not fully realized. What most of you don't know is I've spent time in 3 continents on fixed income markets, directly dealing with interest rates with the largest global investors. My specific instrument has to do with that payout diagram that you see everywhere here on Jay's Corner and throughout the newsletter. I'm analyzing whether or not your payout structure for benefits is worth the money that you will have to pay for that protection. It just so happens the protection that my book deals with is the protection if you incur healthcare costs.
All right, we're back with you. We're chatting with J.O., who not only has written the book Maximize Your Medicare, but he is a certified financial planner and a whole bunch of other things, too. We're looking at 8.2% year-over-year inflation, which has to be in the forefront of everybody's mind. Anytime you go to the store, you see it. What's the role of the Fed in that? Can they really have any impact on inflation?
I think what is difficult is the fact that this is not necessarily from the demand side, but it is from the supply end. The cost of raw materials higher, because if it were pure demand side, they could just raise interest rates, make it more expensive, and people stop. The issue is that there's no good solution necessarily built into the price of corn, for example. And the conflict in Ukraine has not helped matters. It's just kind of fast forwarded the focus on the matter, right? Something that's been going on since the pandemic, which is that supply chain matters, also affecting, publication of Maximize Your Medicare, by the way. So, yeah. That is one that it's going to take a long time to unwind. So what you end up having is the fact that, is there a quick fix then to the idea that the cost of the raw materials is higher, notably higher, to whether or not you can pass that to consumers? I think that it looks like that those are going to be persistent for some time. That's very likely why you see the idea of 11 interest rate hikes, which can be high, but we don't know that. We don't have a crystal ball. Companies have also benefited to a huge degree. The side of the employer really hasn't mattered. A small business can get working capital at cheaper rates. Large companies even more so. It's not only that they could borrow for their own operating reasons. In other words, they could borrow from the bond market, in which case they could use that money in order to pay for operating expenses. Investments in factories, for example. What many people don't know, they've been using the funds that they've borrowed in order to purchase stock of their own company. The fact of the matter is that companies who are going to be faced with higher borrowing costs may need to rethink their stock repurchase programs. You don't need to be a stock trader or a bond trader to understand this, right? In other words, you know the buyer is out there, you know who it is, you know that they have access to money to do the same thing. What did you do? You bought in advance of them doing that. Or you bought knowing the fact that that supportive person, that supportive party was going to be in there buying. However, if the merry-go-round stopped, and now all of a sudden one of the big parties that was a buyer stops buying, tell me how willing you are going to be buying. Oh, the company shouldn't be doing this. Yeah, well, guess what? Who benefited when they were doing this? You did, in your 401k and your IRA. It's funny when volatility works in your favor, no one complains.
Yeah, but if they did that, you're talking about several percent increase in base rates, right?
Absolutely, and there's my issue, which is that, for example, as you know, as well publicized and as is well known, the price of real estate has skyrocketed since the pandemic. It's taken, you thought it couldn't accelerate any faster, but in fact it has, and in certain locations to astronomical levels. Very, very fortunately, the United States has a very high level of employment, which is certainly supporting that side of the equation. The issue is that people do not fully understand the way that mortgage securities and mortgage loans get made. When you want to take out money from the bank in order to borrow for a mortgage, the reality is the bank doesn't own the mortgage. They sell your mortgage so that it can be bought by bond investors. Readers of Jay's Corner, they know what I've been reporting pretty much very, very steadily over the last 6 months, which we have had a very, very tumultuous bond interest rate market, bond market. In fact, the first quarter is a historically bad start to the year. Within the bond market as a whole, outstandingly bad, mortgage bonds. Why is that? Fair question. The reason is the single largest holder of these mortgage bonds, the Federal Reserve, who is planning to liquidate and liquidate soon. This matters to you because the fact is when the banks set your mortgage rate, they're certainly looking at your income. But just as importantly, if not more importantly than that, they're looking to set the rate so that they can sell their mortgage bond to Wall Street investors, to the bond market investors. That explains why mortgage rates have increased by a much wider margin than other interest rates, because bond investors aren't interested in bond securities. Why? The biggest owner is going to be a seller in the future, something that they've telegraphed already. Before someone gets on their high horse and says, you know, the Federal Reserve shouldn't have owned this and this is not the way it should have been, etc., well, guess what? Those lowering borrowing rates, all the people who are going to start complaining in a very short period of time, they've ridden this entire support by the Federal Reserve in order to be able to get the house of their dreams. Well, again, that's predicated largely, not on the supply side. You've got perhaps a challenge to inventory. There aren't enough homes. That's what the sellers will tell you. The buyers will tell you that, well, at this particular prices, rent is so much higher that a home is still a good idea. Well, I didn't say independent of price. And so now that becomes for me, the question and that entire thing. It's more for me, Art, that I think that, people generally speaking don't understand how interest rates work. And when that is the critical input, where the shares of Twitter stock are not part of the global discussion on what happens to financial markets, a particular security, the amount of money in the global financial world is so small and yet dominates our news media and attention because, of course, that gets the attention.
And, and it's an interesting comment because realistically, only the direct shareholders of Twitter care whether Elon Musk buys the company or not because of what it does to their stock. Everybody is impacted by interest rates.
Everyone is impacted by interest rates. And you can just see it even on TV. I was watching TV the other day and you see these car commercials. Well, if you just even within the past year, you had 5 years financing at 0%. You don't have that anymore. You've got 5-year financing at 2.9%, for example. That difference to persons who stretch to buy their dream car is food. And now all of a sudden, the pickup truck, which is very expensive, and as you know, sticker prices of new cars, expensive, but the cost of borrowing to get that car now is going to be impacted, affecting every walk of American life.
It's an interesting paradox, both in the housing market and the auto industry. Right now, if you sell your house, you will probably get more than the asking price. But when you turn around to buy another one, you're going to spend more than that to get in the other one. They will offer you more money for your car right now than it's worth. But when you turn around to buy the next one, you're going to pay more than it's worth.
And around we go. I'm not going to say that it's easy. Of course, if I had a crystal ball, you would have the timing just right. We don't have one. And my point is that, about the fact that, I wrote in the newsletter, I said, withdrawal can be more difficult than the addiction, which is that
always is.
Exactly. And what I'm saying is that low interest rates has been that addiction. Low interest rates has been that, whether or not the everyday people know that or understand its full impact or not.
There's in the political world, everybody wants to blame the other guy.
I know that.
But the reality is, though, that this inflationary trend is worldwide. It's not just here in the United States or just overseas in the European Union or anywhere else. This one is worldwide, isn't it? It's pretty hard to lay that on one individual.
Very difficult. That won't stop the idea of, the fun of find someone else to blame. But just for example, I have a friend who was in the Caribbean. He said to me, well, a loaf of bread costs more than the hourly wage. And that just gives you an idea to what degree this kind of thing can happen. And it is happening around the world. Of course, other countries very, very differently affected than us here in the United States.
So how does a financial planner, when somebody comes in to sit down and say they need a financial plan, they need advice, how do you plan in a market like this?
Well, I think that what we're talking about is two things. It depends on your stage of life, of course, right? I mean, 40-year-old Art Lewis was thinking about career first, of course, your sources of income, to try to grow your income as well. I didn't say don't eat, of course, but you're trying to grow your income and trying to have your nest egg for these types of times. And then as you age, the emphasis switches, which is you've made most of your money over your lifetime as far as your working income. Then it becomes, how do we get lifetime income, meaning Social Security? What's its spot? What are other sources? And then it's actually a different mentality, which is, how are we going to liquidate in an orderly fashion?
Ooh.
Because what has happened over the last 2 decades, right, is that if people had a 401k or if they had an IRA, that because of this tailwind, that it grew at such a rate on average that it paid for inflation.
Right.
Here you can understand it's pretty tricky. I've got to tread carefully because I appear on radio and in the media, largely as information. Of course, I have a commercial interest in every aspect of which I speak. That said, I don't want this thing to be some infomercial. Candidly speaking, I just switch the channel when I see an infomercial. If you're an income building, this means taking full advantage of every possible avenue that's at your disposal. 401k, IRA, HSA, APTC. You can presume that we know about them. You can presume that we know how to set them in place to try to get the max. When you're trying to increase your nest egg, when you're trying to increase your savings, your total net worth, we need to take full advantage. Why? Because when markets are not cooperating, when the tailwind that I've spent a lot of time over the last 15 minutes to try to describe and the ripple effects of that are not in your favor, it's not going to be as easy to just simply gloss over some small little detail which isn't exactly in your favor. You're 31 years old with a promising career. Okay, you can accept the bumps. Why? Your runway is long. You get to late 40s, early 50s, now we've got an issue. And the reason I wrote Jay's Corner is because of the fact that, people just think, okay, well, they want to hold on to cliches. One of these cliches is, in the long run, X. That is just actually fundamentally flawed. Because that entirely depends on the time frame in which you're reading this type of conclusion. Yeah, over a span of 40 years, but guess what? You're 55. And in addition to that, then you have these other issues, sequence risk, other things that I talk about in Jay's Corner and GH2 Unfiltered. The fact that, we've got these little cliches and little phrases that everyone likes to cling on to in order to try to understand difficult topics. What can end up happening is you don't understand the ramifications of the shortcut that you took 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Maybe because you didn't want to feel like you didn't want to do the work. Maybe you felt like it was too difficult and it was too overwhelming. The tailwind of the Federal Reserve provided you a cover. My point is that what happens if the tailwind doesn't exist? For persons that are approaching retirement quickly, it actually becomes more important. This matters because you're going to enter into a stage where liquidating in an orderly fashion becomes the entirety of the exercise. You're trying to liquidate in an orderly fashion and also maintain the lifestyle that you want. I've seen the boilerplate forecasts that people have received in some vertical reporting fashion. They presume a particular type of financial markets returns. My point is we need to question everything. And now that the tailwind looks to be put into jeopardy, we need to take a closer look. That's all. From that point, if you decided, okay, everything is fine, that is totally fine. That is different than let's ignore the situation and simply hold on to age-old, wrongly formulated cliches. This year, what you've got is even the best of class having a difficult year, meaning that in retirement plans, you will see targeted retirement funds. Well, those are almost universally down 7% year to date, plus inflation. So now you've kind of got this double whammy. Whether or not people have fully understood this or considered this combination, I'm skeptical that people have considered that combination. For me, Art, it's the combination.
Well, Jay, as always, appreciate your time. And again, we'll remind everyone, Maximize Your Medicare, and its 9th edition now will be available on the 19th at Amazon.
And anywhere you can buy
it. It's going to be an ebook now? It's just going to be an ebook?
No, the ebook is already available on Amazon and everywhere else.
But there is a
paperback.
Yeah.
Lots of people still want to read physical books. That's what we've learned over the last decade.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? All right, my friend. Thanks for being with us today. We appreciate it.
My privilege as always, Art. Thanks again.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Makes financial planning so complicated is the fact that every person's separate pieces of their jigsaw puzzle are different. What makes it even more challenging is the fact that YouTube is intentionally trying to put you in silos, give you information in 10-minute segments. The problem that creates is it leaves you with the task of assembling the jigsaw pieces together. My suggestion here is to go on the playlists. The playlist will help you assemble your own jigsaw puzzle pieces. And by the way, if you have your own questions or comments, you can leave them in the text below.